Today's story is about a 15-year-old girl who lost both of her arms in a brutal attack, after which she was thrown off a cliff and left for dead. Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Ivy Bar and this is my series called Cup of Crime. If you're obsessed with true crime just like me, then I highly recommend you make yourself a nice cup of coffee and subscribe to my channel as I release new videos every week. Today's story is about a girl who survived an unspeakable horror. I haven't seen many videos about Mary, so I'm hoping that this is something that you haven't heard about, or if you have, that my coverage of this story will give you some new information, as I've tried very hard to do a very thorough research on this case. This is a very heavy case, you should know that, and I need to put in a disclaimer here. Just so you know, this video contains mentions of sexual abuse of a child, drug abuse, descriptions of crime scenes, suicide, mutilation, and eating disorders. So there's a lot of it, I know, so if that's not something that you feel like you want to watch today, I totally understand, and I'm hoping that we can meet in some of my other videos. Now let's get into the story. Mary Vincent was born in 1963 as one of 7 children. She grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada in the United States. Both her parents worked at a casino. Her mom was a blackjack dealer and her father was a machine repairman. In 1978, when Mary was 15 years old, she was a competitive dancer. Dancing was truly her passion. She dreamt of performing and traveling all over the world, and she already performed front stage in Las Vegas, but also in Australia and Hawaii. Mary's parents were going through a messy divorce, and they were also fighting with Mary a lot because she liked wearing makeup, she was skipping school, and she liked to run away from home. And these fights led to Mary running away from home again. Part of a summer she spent with her boyfriend. They lived in his car together. However, later he was arrested for an alleged rape of a schoolgirl. After that, Mary slept in some unlocked cars and she spent some time with her uncle, who had a house in a small village in California. Eventually, she got tired of this lifestyle and she decided to hitchhike to her grandfather's house, who lived in Corona, California. Hitchhiking was a common practice in those times for people to get from one place to another, especially those without a car. So that's what Mary decided to do. It was September 29th, 1978, when she stood on the side of the road with 2 other hitchhikers waiting for someone to give them a ride. At some point, a blue van rolled next to them, and inside of it there was an elder man who looked kind, who had these grandfatherly features. He asked Mary where she was heading, and he told her that he was actually going to Reno, but he could give her a ride to Interstate 5. Although his van was basically empty, he claimed that there was only room for Mary in his car, and he couldn't give a ride to the other hitchhikers. The 2 people thought that that was kind of strange, and they warned Mary not to get into the car, but she was very desperate to get home and she was extremely tired. So she ignored their warnings and she agreed to go with the man. Shortly after the ride started, Mary lit a cigarette, and after that she sneezed. And then the man, he reached towards her, touching her neck, asking her if she was sick, and that made her feel quite uncomfortable, rightfully so. And she moved away from him as much as possible in the car. But after that, he didn't try anything else. He didn't try to touch her nor anything, so she calmed down and she eventually fell asleep. However, after some time, when she woke up, she realized that they were not heading into the direction that the man promised to take her. She got really scared and she found a sharp stick somewhere near her seat. She pointed it at the driver and she demanded he took her to where he promised to take her. He was very apologetic and he said he was sorry, that he was an honest man and this was just a mistake, and he turned the van around. Mary believed him and the ride continued. Then after some time, the driver told her that he really needed to use the bathroom, but he couldn't wait until the next gas station, so they stopped on the side of the road and the man went to use the bathroom, and Mary felt that something was wrong. She noticed that her shoe was untied. She decided to get out of the van and tie the shoe in case she needed to run. And when she was tying her shoe, the man got behind her and he hit her head with a sledgehammer. Soon after that, she was thrown into the van and her hands were tied. The man undressed her and he repeatedly raped her. After he was finished, he was totally naked. He got into the driver's seat and he drove a little further down a canyon road, and he continued to sexually assault the teenager. And she pleaded with him to stop. She promised she wouldn't tell anyone, and she just asked him to set her free. After some time, he laid her on the road. He yelled, and that's a quote, "You want to be free? I will set you free," end quote. He got to the back of his van and he came back with a hatchet. He took one swing and he just chopped off Mary's left arm right below the elbow.
He said, "You want to be set free? I'll set you free." And he pulled out a hatchet from his toolbox and took my left arm and took one swing, and I started to fall. And then he took another swing and I grabbed his arm, grabbed it real tight, and I couldn't figure out, I'm holding him real tight on his arm, but I'm still falling. I started kicking and screaming, hoping someone would hear me, and I'm just kicking nonstop. And he started to chop my right arm off, but because I'm still kicking and screaming, it took longer, so he had to keep chopping away at my arm. At that point, he started to drag me, and I think he thought I was dead.
So the man took her body and he threw it off a cliff, and she landed 30 feet below in a concrete culvert. After that, he drove off. Mary was bleeding as she was in pain, and she was fighting this need to fall asleep. She knew that if she fell asleep, it would be over and she would be dead. And she felt that she needed to fight. She needed to survive to prevent this attacker from getting his hands on other girls.
I knew that if he were to do this to somebody else, they wouldn't survive it. And I don't know if I'm going to survive this. So I had to get up as quickly as I could to get help.
She got up. She put her, what was left of her arms, she dipped it in the mud to stop the bleeding. She basically climbed this 30-foot cliff. She got on this rural road and she was walking with her hands like upright so that she wouldn't bleed out and so that her muscles wouldn't fall out. It was completely dark at that time, so she was only guided by the sound of traffic. She was trying to get to the freeway, looking for some help, obviously, and the first car that saw her, they slowed down, but we can only assume that they got scared of what they saw, so they sped off. Fortunately, the very next car that noticed Mary, they stopped and they decided to help her. They immediately rushed her to a hospital where doctors tried to save her life. Fortunately, the doctors were successful. They managed to save Mary. Soon after, she really didn't want to sleep. She was very focused on trying to finish this composite sketch to work with the investigators to catch her attacker, and they did that. And this composite sketch, it was so realistic that basically when a woman called Joan Eversole, who lived in Martinez, saw this sketch, she immediately recognized her neighbor, who she had known for 13 years at the time. It turned out that the attacker was Lawrence Singleton. Lawrence Bernard Singleton, also referred to as Larry, was born in Tampa, Florida on the 28th of July 1927. He was a Leo and he was 51 years old on the day of the attack. At that time, he was a merchant seaman. He was known to have a bad temper. He was really violent, especially when he was drunk. In his earlier years, he was convicted for contributing to delinquency of a minor. He was married twice and he had one daughter, Deborah, who was similar age to Mary. They had a very bad relationship actually, Larry and Deborah. He tried to discipline her a lot, but she was rebelling against that. By the time of Larry's arrest, Mary was already wearing prosthetic arms. 6 months after the attack, she had to face him in a courtroom where she testified against him. Larry, of course, had a story for his defense. He claimed that Mary was actually a prostitute and that they indeed had sex, but that he didn't hurt her at all, that she was actually threatening him, that she was gonna accuse him of some false things, and he was calling her names. However, despite all of that, Mary stood up and she pointed one of her prosthetic arms at him, and with a firm voice, she said that that's the man that did this to her. Can we just for a minute stop here and appreciate how amazingly brave this girl was? Like, she was just 15. She was just 15 years old, and after all of that, after all that she went through, she survived, and she had this courage to go to that courtroom and to point straight at her attacker. Yes, Mary was extremely brave, but she was still terrified of Larry after what he did to her. After testifying against him, she actually had to walk past him in a courtroom where he was sitting with his lawyer. And as she was walking next to him, he whispered something to her. After that, she turned pale and she ran out. Later, she told the prosecutor that he whispered to her, "I'll finish this job if it takes me the rest of my life." In March 1979, Larry was found guilty of attempted murder and rape and many other crimes, and he was sentenced to 14 years in prison, which was the maximum sentence in California at that time. The judge said that if it was in his power, he would actually sentence Larry to spend the rest of his life in prison. Mary also won $2.5 million in a civil judgment against her attacker, but she was never able to collect it because the man was unemployed, he was in poor health, and he didn't have any savings. In the years that followed, while Larry was serving his sentence in prison, Mary and her family were falling apart. Her parents sent her to a school for handicapped, and she was also seeing a psychiatrist, but it wasn't really working out for her. She didn't like the memories that she had to talk about, so she quit. Soon after, the family basically scattered. Everyone moved somewhere else. However, for a while, Mary stayed in Las Vegas. She finished high school there, and after she did, she was really struggling. She felt very isolated. She thought that she had to find new friends because the old ones either hated her, according to her, or they just didn't know how to act around her. She tried to go to different schools to give speeches to kids about not hitchhiking, warning them about what could happen to them, but there were a lot of times when kids were actually making some very rude comments or saying that this would never happen to them. So Mary stopped doing that too. She joined some victim support groups and she tried talking to psychologists, but she never felt like anyone could actually understand her. Mary attended the University of Nevada in Las Vegas, but after that she actually moved to the Washington state, where she married a landscape designer in 1987. However, this marriage only lasted about 3 years, after which the couple split. Mary was still very much paralyzed with fear. She had troubles leaving home, and she actually became anorexic. Also in 1987, after serving just 8 years and 4 months, Larry Singleton was granted parole. He earned his parole apparently because of his model behavior and because he was a teaching assistant in a prison class. Rightfully so, his early release caused absolute outrage in the public. People were really angry, and as a result of that, something called the Singleton Bill was drafted, which was supposed to stop early release of perpetrators who committed crimes involving torture. Mary was a very strong supporter of this bill. As a result, the law was changed in California as well, and now for a crime involving torture, the minimum sentencing was 25 years to life. So Larry was very well known to the public for this horrible crime that he committed against Mary. And after he was granted parole, no city wanted him to settle in there. Eventually, he had to spend his parole time in a trailer on the grounds of San Quentin prison. Still, he was absolutely unremorseful, and he claimed he was innocent and that it wasn't him who hired Mary. According to the Times magazine, as authorities attempted to settle him in one Bay Area town after another, angry crowds protested, screamed, picketed, and eventually prevailed. In Rodeo, about 25 miles northeast of San Francisco, there was a crowd of approximately 500 people that were armed and that forced officers to actually move Larry from a hotel room. There were many other protests, and at one of them, as a result of that, there were officers that had to actually move Larry in a bulletproof vest. It was the Californian governor's decision to place Larry in this trailer at the grounds of San Quentin prison for the rest of his parole, which was basically just 1 year. After Larry was released from prison, Mary was absolutely terrified. She went into hiding and she had extreme nightmares that resulted in her falling off her bed and hurting herself many times, including breaking some of her ribs. But Mary wasn't the only woman that was actually scared of Larry at that time. His own daughter, Deborah, was also terrified. She was changing her name and she was moving, and she actually asked the authorities if there was anything that they could do to keep her father in prison for longer. All they told her is that they couldn't do anything and that she should just file for a restraining order against him, which she found quite ridiculous because that wasn't just something that would stop him if he wanted to hurt her. After serving his parole in 1988, Larry roamed around the East Bay, and in 1990 he moved to Tampa, Florida. There he was twice arrested for petty theft. In spring, he was given a 60-day sentence for stealing a $10 disposable camera, and in the winter he was given a 2-year sentence for stealing a $3 hat. In 1997, Larry was admitted to a psychiatric hospital after an attempted suicide. Just 9 days later, after he was released from the hospital, on the 19th of February 1997, a neighbor of Larry's called the police, telling them that he witnessed Larry assaulting a woman in his apartment. When the police responded and they got into his apartment, they saw him covered in blood, and next to him, lying on his living room floor apartment, there was the dead body of Roxanne Haynes. She was stabbed multiple times in the upper body. She was just 31 years old at the time of her death. She was working as a prostitute and she was the mother to 3 children. This is gonna be a little side note from me here, but I feel like I need to say that I absolutely hate it when media portray victims who were sex workers as just that. When I was researching this case, there was a lot of information on Mary, but the second attack that Singleton did was just, he killed a prostitute. He killed a mother of 3. And that was basically it. And she was much more than that. They are all much more than that. She was a person. She had a family. She had a daughter and 2 sons. She had some hopes and some dreams. And I would like to tell you a little bit more about her, what I managed to find out. Most of what I'm about to tell you are just words of her longtime boyfriend, Clifford Tyson, because her family didn't really want to comment. Roxanne had thick dark hair and she was about 6 feet tall. She was the youngest of 5 children. According to Clifford, since she was 2 years old, her grandfather was sexually abusing her, and the whole family knew about it, but no one did anything. One night when she was about 6 or 7 years old and her grandfather was in her room, he actually died. And after that, according to Clifford again, her father, who was an abusive drunk, apparently continued to sexually abuse her until she was 14. Then her mom, who's a bartender, died, and after that, Roxanne ran away from home. Family friends took her in, and she graduated from Hillsborough High School in 1984. Soon after that, she gave birth to her first daughter, Akina. It is not really clear when Roxanne started using cocaine, but she was first arrested for possession in 1986. After that, she was sentenced to 4 years of probation, but she violated it with another charge for prostitution, for which she was sentenced to 2 years of house arrest. Again, she violated the conditions by another arrest for prostitution, and this pattern of arresting and rearresting basically continued for about a decade. One time when she returned from prison in May of 1988, Akina was nearly 3 years old, and the insurance settlement that Roxanne got after her mother's death, which was about $7,000 or $8,000, was gone, together with her last boyfriend. Roxanne tried to apply for different jobs. At one time, there was a man who knew about her past who offered her a position of a bookkeeper, which she accepted, but then he came on to her and it turned out that he just wanted to use her, so she had to quit. She tried applying for different restaurants jobs, like fast food restaurants, but because she didn't have any experience and she had a criminal record, no one wanted to hire her. Roxanne met Clifford on the job in 1988. She asked him for a ride and he agreed. While they were in the car, they talked a lot. She told him about her daughter and she slept for a little while. After that, Clifford took her to his sister's house where she rested for a few days, and that's basically how the relationship started, and it was the most significant relationship of her adult life. The couple had 2 sons together. One was Clifton in 1989 and then Malachi in 1993. Roxanne was a very good mother. She read stories before bed for her children. She wore costumes together with them for Halloweens. She never missed any performance at school. She really loved her kids. For some time, Clifford had been working as a trucker for a carpet and flooring company. However, he had an accident in July of 1996, which resulted in him having an injured knee. He required a surgery, so he wasn't able to work after that, and Roxanne became the sole provider, which made it even harder for her to look for another job. The day she tragically lost her life, she was last seen entering a grocery store, and how she got to Singleton's house and why he killed her, only he knows. During the trial, Larry, of course, had a story for his defense. He told the jurors that he was depressed and over-medicated and drunk when he decided to pick up Roxanne from the streets where they previously met. He took her home and he paid her $20 for oral sex. They were both nude when he gave her $10 additional for her to call the cab and get home, but he then claimed that she grabbed his wallet, trying to steal money from him, and he wanted to stop her from that. And there was a table in his living room where he kept a knife for chopping vegetables when watching TV. And Roxanne apparently grabbed this knife and she wanted to hurt Larry. And he just tried to protect himself and he grabbed her hand and they were struggling for a few moments. And as a result of it, Roxanne stabbed herself. Then he said that he didn't actually realize that she was stabbed, but she was laying on the sofa and bleeding, and she asked him to embrace her, which he did. He said that they were embracing, and only then he realized she was bleeding, and he wanted to help her, and he wanted to call 911, but instead of a phone, he grabbed a remote control. And when he realized, he just threw it away, and he said that he had to take her to a hospital himself instead. I think it's a little bit strange because, like, okay, you grab the remote control, but you can still go and grab your phone to call 911. But, okay. So he allegedly picked her up and tried to get her to the door to take her to the hospital, but his knee started to hurt, so they both fell on the ground. And that's how the police found them. Mary Vincent decided to testify against him in court. She told the jurors all about what happened to her and how dangerous she believed that Larry was. The jury found him guilty of first-degree murder just about 4 hours after they started deliberating, and the judge sentenced him to death. Larry was actually never executed. He died of cancer on the 28th of December 2001. He spent his last days in a prison hospital. In the late 1990s, Mary moved to Orange County and got a job clerking at a local district attorney's office. There she met Tom Wilson, who was an investigator, and the couple later got married. They had 2 sons together, and Mary also started her Mary Vincent Foundation, which was supposed to help the victims of traumatic crimes. Unfortunately, the couple later got a divorce. As I mentioned at the beginning, Mary really loved to dance. She wanted to be a professional dancer. However, after the brutal attack, the doctors had to use a piece of her leg to save what was left of her arm. And after that surgery, she wasn't able to dance anymore. However, Mary found a new passion. She said that before her attack, she wasn't able to draw a straight line, but afterwards, she found this new skill in her for creating artwork, which inspired her and restored her self-esteem. And she started creating images of powerful women as action figures. And she also does individual and family portraits on commission. What is more, she learned to improve her prosthetic arms using some spare parts, and she managed to build a few of them, which give her more mobility for creating her illustrations, but also for that let her do other things, like for example bowling. Additionally, Mary found healing in becoming a victim's advocate. She said that it was because of other victim advocates and attorneys she was able to turn from a victim to a survivor. And although she can never forget what happened to her, she can move past it. After Larry died, Mary said that she didn't really feel relief. However, she saw this relief on the faces of her sons, and that it just had to be enough for her. And she was just glad that the lives of her sons were not in danger anymore. Mary Vincent wants everyone to know that she's not a victim, she's a survivor. And she truly is that. What she went through is absolutely horrific, but she never gave up. She found the strength to save her own life, and she also surely saved many other lives by helping put Lawrence to prison twice. And now she just lives a quiet, private life, and she focuses on her artwork and on her 2 sons. That is everything that I've got for you today. What do you think about this case? Because I'm absolutely horrified by the fact that men like Lawrence walk the earth. I really hope that Mary and her family and also Roxanne's family found some peace and that they are living a happy life as much as that's possible. Let me know in the comments down below what you think about this case, and feel free to leave any recommendations for other cases that I could cover in my next episodes. Thank you so much for watching, it really means a lot to me. Please take care, stay safe, and never be afraid to speak up for yourselves. I will see you soon in my next video. Bye!